I was at my desk grading papers when I got the call. The kind that doesn't just interrupt your day, it rewrites your life in a single breath. I'm sorry to inform you, the voice said, calm and sterile, that your father, Robert Kingston, has passed away. The woman on the line claimed she was with a private care home, said he'd suffered a massive cardiac arrest, died in his sleep, no pain. I dropped my pen. My father and I hadn't spoken in 3 months after a disagreement about, ironically, his will. But still, dead, without a hospital notice, without even a damn obituary? She said the body had already been processed for cremation, that my sister, Clarissa, had arranged everything. She was listed as next of kin, the woman said. My blood ran cold. My father had been healthy, lucid, and stubborn. And Clarissa? She and Dad hadn't spoken in almost a year. I called Clarissa immediately. She didn't pick up. I tried again. No answer. I texted, emailed, even sent a message through our family's old Facebook group. Nothing. For 2 days, it was radio silence. Then came an email from a law firm I didn't recognize, informing me that probate proceedings had begun and that my father's estate had been settled. Settled? He'd been dead less than a week. They attached a PDF copy of what they called an updated will, allegedly signed 2 months ago, naming Clarissa as sole beneficiary. It looked official: watermarks, signatures, witnesses. My name wasn't even mentioned. The estate, which included our childhood home, a massive lakefront property, 2 classic cars, and a trust fund, had been transferred, fully, irrevocably. I called the law office. A receptionist answered, then put me on hold. When the attorney picked up, his tone shifted the second I identified myself. Mr. Kingston, I'm not at liberty to discuss client matters with you. But I'm his son, I said. My name is literally Kingston. According to our records, Mr. Kingston has passed and left no claims or requests for you in the updated testament. What about a funeral? I asked. An obituary? A death certificate? There was a pause. Then, the remains have already been cremated. Clarissa handled the arrangements. If you'd like a copy of the certificate, we'll have someone fax it over. I felt like I was talking to a brick wall made of lies. Nothing made sense. My father hated cremation. He'd always said he wanted to be buried next to Mom. I want to see the body, I snapped. That's not possible, the lawyer said. That night, I dug through every voicemail, email, and text I'd received from Dad in the past 3 months. His last message to me had been short. Call me. We need to talk about Clarissa, sent 2 days before the date of death listed on the certificate. The hairs on my neck stood up. Clarissa had motive, access, and now apparently full control of our father's estate. I wasn't a conspiracy theorist, but I wasn't blind either. She had done something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew my father wasn't just gone, he'd been erased. I drove to his lake house, expecting it to be locked down. It was. But the mailbox was overflowing, and the lawn was overgrown. A neighbor saw me pacing the drive and came over. I thought your dad moved, she said. I saw a moving truck a few weeks ago. Woman driving it said he was going to a facility in Oregon. My father hated Oregon. He called it mud with a coastline. I asked what the woman looked like. Thin, blonde, real sharp, wore a lot of rings. Clarissa, no doubt. I asked if she'd seen Dad since. Nope, just that one day. Never saw your dad at all. She said he was already en route. My skin crawled. There were no reports of his death, no obituary, no service. Just a moving truck and a vanishing act. The death certificate, when it finally arrived by fax, looked legit on the surface. But Nate, my college buddy who now worked in document verification, pointed out a few inconsistencies. The seal was digital, not embossed. The physician's signature didn't match the known sample I'd found online. And the certifying authority? A facility that didn't exist on the state registry. Clarissa had forged it. Or paid someone to do it. I was staring at an official document that declared my living father dead, and if I didn't act soon, everything he had worked for would disappear with him. I filed an emergency petition in probate court to freeze the estate transfer. The judge, visibly annoyed, said I had no compelling evidence that the death was illegitimate. How do you expect to dispute a death without a body, he asked. By proving the body never existed, I said. The judge gave me a week. 1 week to either produce evidence my father was alive or to watch Clarissa walk off with everything. It was a nearly impossible task, unless, of course, my father wasn't just figuratively missing, but literally hiding. I started with what I knew. My father was old school. He didn't trust banks, didn't believe in digital records. He kept physical ledgers, backups, and most importantly, a second cell phone. One he never told Clarissa about. I found it, hidden behind a vent in his home office, battery dead but still intact. I charged it, powered it on, and there it was. A single message sent to a contact saved as Dylan P.O. Box. The message read, "She's trying something. If anything happens, you know where I am." I drove 4 hours to the return address listed on the envelope. A rural mailbox, a dirt road, and finally, a cabin in the woods. And there he was. My father opened the door in flannel pajamas, holding a mug of coffee like I had just woken him from a nap. He blinked twice and said, "Took you long enough." I almost passed out. He wasn't dead. He wasn't cremated. He was hiding. And I had just unearthed a crime that no one could have seen coming. "What the hell happened?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Clarissa tried to kill me, and if we don't get to court fast, she's about to kill my legacy." Standing in that doorway, staring at the man I'd been told was ashes in an urn, was a moment that short-circuited my brain. My father, Robert Kingston, alive, gruff as ever, sipping weak black coffee like the past few weeks, hadn't been a swirling vortex of insanity. I stepped inside without a word, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. The cabin smelled of cedar, old books, and instant soup. His hair was longer, more silver than I remembered, and his gait was slower, but his eyes were sharp. He sat down, motioned to the other creaky armchair and said, "Tell me everything she's done." So I did. I told him about the phone call, the cremation lie, the will, the estate transfer, the fake death certificate, and the judge's 1-week deadline. He didn't flinch. Just nodded like he'd expected every word. When I finally stopped to breathe, he said, "She moved faster than I thought. I was planning to come out of hiding next week. Guess we're speeding things up." I asked the obvious question, "Why the hell are you hiding? Why didn't you call me?" He sighed, the kind of sigh that sounds like it's carrying 10 years of regret. "Because I thought she was going to kill me, son, and I didn't know who I could trust." My stomach twisted. "Kill you?" "Not with a knife. She's smarter than that. She was poisoning my pills, one at a time. Took me a while to figure it out." He stood and walked to a small safe under a false floorboard. Opened it. Pulled out a bottle of heart medication with a pharmacy label. She swapped these out when she was staying at the lake house. I only noticed because the capsules were shinier, and I felt worse every time I took one. I switched back to the old batch I kept at the office. Got better. Then I switched back. Got worse again. She was thinning them with something. He handed me a sealed plastic bag with 2 capsules inside. I was going to get them tested, but first I needed to vanish, just in case. I could barely process it. My sister hadn't just committed fraud. She'd allegedly tried to murder our father and bury the evidence behind a forged death. The motives weren't subtle. Clarissa had always been ambitious, entitled, and furious that Dad hadn't changed his will to give her the controlling share of the lake house and the trust fund. After Mom died, they drifted apart, and she turned bitter. When Dad refused to sell the lake house to a developer friend of hers, she exploded. But this? Faking his death? Poison? I thought those were things that happened in crime shows, not in my family. "We need to go to the police," I said. He shook his head. "And give her time to cover her tracks? No, we go to court first, catch her while she's still bold. Then we deal with the rest." It was mad. It was reckless. But it was also right. The court had already opened probate. If we walked in while she was there, claiming his death, holding the fake will while Dad entered the courtroom alive, that was our kill shot. We wouldn't just dispute the inheritance. We'd expose the whole rotten scheme in one brutal blow. We planned it like a heist. Nate came out to the cabin with his gear laptops, scanners, portable printers, and 2 microphones. Dad recorded a sworn statement on video, detailing the attempted poisoning, the fake medication, and his last interactions with Clarissa. We took high-res photos of the pill bottles, his medical logs, the fake will, we still had a copy, and even the death certificate with its digital signature. Nate ran the certificate through verification software. As suspected, the QR code didn't match any known state archives. It was a dummy link. We dug deeper. Turns out, the facility listed on the document? A defunct hospice that had closed 5 years ago. Clarissa had layered forgery over forgery, hoping no one would dig beneath the topsoil. Dad shaved, cut his hair, and put on his old church suit. He looked like a ghost putting himself back together. I booked us a hotel near the courthouse under fake names. The plan was simple. I'd go to the hearing like normal, act like I had accepted the death, let Clarissa present the will again. Then, at the peak of her speech, Dad would walk in with a printed affidavit and the death certificate exposed for forgery. The judge would have no choice but to freeze the assets, and if we were lucky, maybe even issue an immediate order for investigation. She's going to burn for this, I told him. No, he said. She's going to watch everything she wanted slip through her fingers. That's worse. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was oddly quiet. Clarissa was already there, dressed in black like she'd just come from a funeral, holding a tissue in one hand and our father's alleged last will in the other. She put on quite the performance, sniffled, wiped her eyes, and handed the paperwork to the court clerk like a woman burdened by grief. The judge, a stern woman named Levins, reviewed the file. And the death certificate? Clarissa nodded, produced it with flair. I have it right here, Your Honor. She spoke softly, like grief had nearly broken her. It was almost Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have bought it myself. Ms. Kingston, Judge Levins said, since you are the only named beneficiary and no objections have been filed, I stood up. Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to file one now. Clarissa turned to me, face pale but steady. Your brother wasn't involved in Dad's final wishes, she said quickly. I'm not here to argue, I said. I just think the court might want to hear directly from the deceased. That's when the door opened. Every head in the room turned. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward, hand near his holster, and in walked my father, alive, real, not a hologram, not a ghost. Just a 73-year-old man in a gray suit who looked the judge straight in the eye and said, Sorry I'm late. I was told I was dead. Chaos. Pure chaos. Gasps erupted. The clerk dropped her pen. Clarissa's mouth opened but made no sound. The judge stood. Mr. Kingston? In the flesh, Dad said. And I'd like to know why my daughter declared me dead without so much as a pulse check. Everything after that felt like a movie running in fast forward. The judge ordered an immediate halt to all estate proceedings. Security escorted Clarissa to a side room. The clerk called in a supervisor. Nate entered with copies of our evidence binder, handing them to the court reporter. Dad gave a brief sworn statement right there at the podium. Your Honor, he said, this wasn't just fraud. It was a hostile takeover attempt on my life. And now I want to see what the justice system does when a dead man asks for it. The judge nodded slowly. You'll get your answer, Mr. Kingston, believe me. Clarissa didn't speak for a full 60 seconds. That might not sound like much, but in a courtroom, a minute of silence with everyone staring at you is an eternity. Her mouth moved like she was searching for a line, a lifeline, a way to snap reality back to the script she thought she was controlling. The judge stared her down like a hawk, watching a mouse pretend to be a rock. Dad stood tall at the center of the room, his expression firm but not angry, just tired, worn out, like a man who'd been running from a shadow he couldn't outrun until now. Then Clarissa finally spoke. That's not my father. A ripple of confusion shot through the room. I turned so fast my neck cracked. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Her voice steadied like she'd found a new lie to cling to. That's a double, an impersonator. You think I don't see what you're trying to do? The judge blinked slowly. Ms. Kingston, are you suggesting that this man is not your father, Robert Kingston, despite the fact that he is standing here with valid identification, direct physical resemblance, and has already matched multiple signatures under sworn statement? Clarissa folded her arms. All of that could be faked. People pay actors, deepfakes, AI. You don't know what's possible anymore. It was absurd. She'd pivoted from grieving daughter to unhinged conspiracy theorist in the space of 5 minutes. I half expected her to claim Dad was a clone grown in a basement. But the most chilling part? She believed it. Or at least, she knew this was her only move now: deny reality so aggressively that it couldn't pin her down. The judge ordered a recess and had Dad escorted to chambers for private verification. He answered personal questions, things only Robert Kingston would know: names, dates, military service numbers. They even fingerprinted him. Meanwhile, the courtroom was buzzing. A murmur here, a cough there. Clarissa sat completely still, eyes locked on the doors. When they re-entered the room, Judge Levins adjusted her glasses and said, "For the record, the court has confirmed via biometric and personal record verification that this man is indeed Robert Kingston, presumed deceased. The court finds the prior death certificate submitted to be fraudulent." Clarissa didn't flinch, but her face cracked. Not visibly, not like a tear or a sob, but something behind her eyes broke in that moment. She was caught, fully. The judge ordered her taken into custody pending investigation. As the bailiffs approached, she shouted, "He left me no choice. You don't know what he did to me. He was going to cut me out completely." The room erupted. People gasped. My stomach clenched. Because she wasn't entirely wrong. Dad had changed the will, but not out of malice, out of necessity. I remembered the email he'd sent before this all started. "We need to talk about Clarissa. This was why." As they cuffed her, she turned and screamed, "You stole everything from me. I was supposed to have the house, the trust. All of it was mine. You gave it all to him." She pointed at me, her eyes wild. "He never cared about you. He just wanted someone he could control. I had to do it." Then she spit on the floor and let herself be let out, head high like a martyr. It was surreal. The courtroom fell into stunned silence, and Judge Levins called for the record to be sealed for privacy until a full hearing could be scheduled. After Clarissa was gone, Dad sat down for the first time, his hands shaking ever so slightly. "I never thought it would get this far," he said. "I thought if I just disappeared she'd give up. She'd take a small payout and move on." I looked at him, feeling that old ache of unresolved family tension rise like bile. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked at me, eyes tired. "Because I was ashamed. I raised her, I loved her, and I saw the signs, but I didn't want to believe she'd go this far, so I stayed quiet. I thought I could outlast her. Turns out she almost won." The legal fallout began immediately. The forged death certificate was submitted for forensic analysis. The medical license number used on it belonged to a doctor who died 4 years earlier. The hospice center had been shuttered since 2016. The attorney who filed the probate documents was on vacation and wouldn't return calls. The entire scheme had been a carefully stitched tapestry of partial truths and bureaucratic loopholes, all riding on the hope that no one would look too closely. Clarissa had counted on the system being overwhelmed. She'd weaponized grief, trust, and administrative laziness. And it had almost worked. But now came the real work. Restoring the estate, unfreezing the assets, filing fraud charges, and dragging every complicit party into the light. Dad appointed me power of attorney. "I'm done," he said. "You fight now." And I did. I hired a civil litigator, filed a motion to nullify the fraudulent will, and petitioned the court for full restitution. Clarissa's accounts were frozen. The trust fund was locked. The lake house? Still in Dad's name, though the title had briefly been transferred and now had to be unwound. Everything needed to be unraveled, examined, and rewound like a crime scene covered in legal tape. Media got wind of it. "Man walks into court declared dead." It was too good a headline to ignore, but we stayed quiet. Dad refused interviews. I declined comment. Not because we were afraid, but because it wasn't about attention. It was about fixing what had been broken quietly, methodically, and completely. Nate, meanwhile, kept documenting everything. Every timestamp, every fraudulent filing, every misstep in the probate process. "We could write a guidebook after this," he joked. "Call it How to Come Back from the Dead Legally." I laughed, but it was hollow. Because at night when things were quiet, I kept hearing Clarissa's voice screaming in that courtroom, "You left me no choice." Because that's what scared me most. Not her rage, not her fraud, but the conviction in her voice, the belief that she was right, that she had earned the estate, that our father had betrayed her by not handing it over. That kind of entitlement, the kind that turns lies into self-righteous, truthless poison. And somewhere along the way, Clarissa had taken the whole bottle. After the courtroom shock and Clarissa's arrest, the adrenaline wore off fast, and what came next was pure administrative hell. People don't realize that even when you prove the truth, when you literally walk a dead man into court, damage left in a liar's wake doesn't disappear with a gavel bang. It lingers. It infects everything it touched. And Clarissa's lies, they were metastatic. Every account she accessed, every document she altered, every asset she rehomed in the weeks following our dad's staged death had to be tracked, audited, and clawed back piece by piece. I became less of a son and more of an accountant, detective, and cleanup crew, all rolled into one. First came the house. The lakefront Kingston home, the one Clarissa had coveted since our childhood like it was her birthright, had been temporarily transferred into a holding company, Bright Horizon Holdings, LLC. On paper, it looked like a legitimate real estate investment firm. Dig deeper, though, and it was just a shell. No employees, no operations, no leases filed. Just an address tied to a strip mall mailbox in Phoenix, and a registered agent who turned out to be a guy Clarissa had once dated in college. She'd used the LLC as a legal buffer to quietly transfer the deed, likely to sell it later or leverage it for loans. The title company hadn't even flagged it because a death certificate and a valid will were presented. Technically, it looked legit. We contacted the title office immediately and filed a notice of dispute. Because Dad was deceased at the time of transfer, and that death had now been proven fraudulent, the transfer itself became null in theory but not in practice. The title company wanted indemnity, a notarized statement from Dad, and a court-ordered reversal. It took over 2 weeks and 3 hearings to get the house officially placed back into his name. During that time, we discovered Clarissa had already arranged a viewing with a high-end broker, attempting to quietly list the home off-market as an estate sale. She hadn't just faked Dad's death, she'd tried to liquidate his memory for a quick payout. Next came the cars. Dad's '68 Mustang and his vintage Triumph motorcycle had been donated to a private collection museum. Again, the paperwork on the surface looked clean. Clarissa had presented the curator with the death cert and claimed Dad's dying wish was for his cars to be admired instead of sold. It sounded noble, and maybe that's what made me angriest. She hadn't just been greedy, she'd wrapped her thefts in sentimentality, like that made them honorable. We tracked the curator down. He was cooperative once he saw the news article about Dad walking into court. "I thought she was a grieving daughter," he said. "She was good, convincing. She cried on the phone when I said I'd take them." He returned the cars the next day, no legal hassle, no questions asked. The accounts were trickier. Clarissa had rerouted the trust fund into a newly opened series of custodial accounts. Most of it was untouched, thank God, but roughly 47.0 had been reinvested into something labeled a legacy growth portfolio through an obscure brokerage firm in New York. It sounded fancy, but it was fake. Nate dug into it and discovered it was a placeholder account, no real investments, no securities, just a shell to make it seem like the funds were being handled responsibly. It was nothing but legal theater, smoke and mirrors, designed to delay anyone who asked questions. We sent cease and desist letters, contacted the brokerage, and initiated fraud proceedings. The money was frozen. And then there were the people. The lawyer who filed the probate? Gone. On sabbatical, his receptionist said. His office had been shut down temporarily, and his phone redirected to a voicemail loop. We later found out he'd had a working agreement with Clarissa through a separate trust that she had tried to establish in Dad's name. His involvement was murky, complicit maybe, or just willfully blind. Either way, the state bar opened an inquiry, and his license was suspended pending investigation. The most shocking part came when we pulled Clarissa's bank records through court order. Over 180.0 had been transferred to her personal account across several days following Dad's death. She'd also made several large purchases, a Rolex, a deposit on a Tesla, and, most curious of all, a non-refundable payment to a private investigator in Nevada. The invoice listed ongoing surveillance and background check detail, sibling. That last word hit me in the chest. She'd been investigating me, trying to dig for things she could use to discredit me if I challenged her. It wasn't enough to fake our father's death. She wanted to assassinate my character too, in case I ever fought back. She planned for everything except him walking through the courtroom door. Dad, meanwhile, was growing quieter. The energy from that day in court, the righteous fury that had lit him up, was fading. He spent his mornings sitting on the back porch, drinking coffee, and staring out at the lake. I asked him one afternoon if he was okay. "Not really," he said. "I keep thinking back to when she was 6 years old. She used to braid the dog's tail with pink yarn. I never imagined she'd grow up to do something like this." He looked at me, then down at his cup. "She's still my daughter. I want to hate her, but all I feel is grief." The judge scheduled a formal fraud hearing to determine not just Clarissa's criminal responsibility, but whether she'd permanently forfeited her right to inherit. Normally, fraud results in disqualification under Slayer statutes laws that prevent anyone who harms or kills, or in our case, tries to erase, a benefactor from collecting their estate. Our attorney was confident. "This isn't even a gray area, it's textbook fraud with intent to deceive for financial gain." But I wasn't after her inheritance, I was after her legacy. I wanted it recorded forever that she'd tried to fake a man's death to steal his life. The court issued a restitution plan. Clarissa's assets were liquidated, the watch sold, the Tesla order canceled, the accounts were drained and returned to the trust. But the damage, emotional, reputational, psychological, couldn't be so easily repaid. Every friend, every distant cousin who'd seen the obituary, now had to be told, "Actually, he's alive." Every email Clarissa had sent on behalf of the family now had to be corrected. It was a PR nightmare, and we had to treat it like one. We hired a small communications firm to issue an official statement. "Robert Kingston is alive and well. Reports of his death were filed in error and are currently under legal investigation." We kept it vague, clean, but people whispered. At night I would sit by the lake and wonder what would have happened if I hadn't called, hadn't fought, hadn't remembered that second phone. If I'd just accepted the lie, there would have been no challenge. No investigation. Dad would have lived out the rest of his days hidden in fear. Clarissa would be rich, and the truth would have stayed buried. But the world needs people who press back against the impossible even when it sounds insane. Who refuse to accept that paperwork trumps people. Who believe that sometimes the dead just need one person willing to dig them up again, metaphorically or otherwise. The fraud hearing wasn't just a courtroom session, it was a reckoning. A deep, open wound of a proceeding that sliced through every protective layer a family builds over decades. The judge had consolidated the estate fraud case with a motion for criminal referral, meaning Clarissa would now be facing both civil and criminal scrutiny in the same setting. She was brought into the courtroom in cuffs, dressed in a drab beige prison-issued blouse, looking thinner, more haggard but no less defiant. She didn't flinch when Dad entered. Didn't blink when I sat down, but the way she clenched her jaw told me she was still playing some version of the long game in her head, still convinced that somehow the court would bend to her narrative. Judge Levins presided again, and she wasn't pulling punches. "This hearing," she said, "will determine not only whether Ms. Kingston knowingly submitted forged documents and misappropriated assets, but whether she engaged in willful attempts to defraud the court, endanger the health of her father, and undermine the lawful administration of a living estate." The courtroom wasn't full of reporters. Media had been barred due to the sensitive nature of the accusations, but everyone who mattered was there. The probate auditor, 2 attorneys from the district attorney's fraud division, the state forensic analyst, and several investigators from the Elder Protection Bureau. Clarissa's attorney, a younger woman with a clipboard full of excuses, opened with a bizarre claim that Clarissa had genuinely believed her father was near death, that the documents she filed had been given to her by a third party, and that the financial transfers were made to protect the estate from undue taxation and opportunistic relatives. I scoffed out loud at that, earning a sharp glance from the judge. Then came the play we all expected, the mental health and stress defense. Her lawyer painted a picture of a grieving daughter, overwhelmed and manipulated by shadowy advisors. It might have worked if we didn't have a video of Clarissa smiling while touring the lake house with a broker 2 days after filing the death certificate. Our attorney went second, and he didn't waste time. He laid it out chronologically, methodically, with digital exhibits flashing across the courtroom monitor. Email timestamps, account transfers, metadata on the fake death certificate, even a side-by-side video comparison of Dad's known signature versus the forged one on the will. When the forensic expert took the stand, he spoke with clinical calm. This document, he said, pointing to the death certificate, was not issued by any hospital or medical facility. It was created using a template downloaded from an unsecured PDF site and digitally signed using an image file, not a legal signature. The judge leaned back. You're telling this court that the declaration of death was created on a home computer? Yes, Your Honor, he said, in Microsoft Word. But the most devastating blow came when Dad himself testified. He walked slowly to the stand, dressed in a sharp navy suit, a cane in one hand, and a printout of the fake will in the other. His voice cracked at times, not from weakness, but from restraint. He read out loud the paragraph where Clarissa had allegedly written his final wishes, including the line, "My daughter has always stood by me and deserves everything I leave behind." He stopped, looked over the rim of his glasses and said, "I never wrote those words. I would never write those words." And the person who forged this document knew exactly what they were doing. When asked about the medication, he told the court how he discovered the pills had been tampered with. The lab results confirmed it. Clarissa had ground down over-the-counter sleep medication and packed it into the heart pill capsules. Just enough to dull me, Dad said. Make me slow, confused, less likely to question her. The courtroom went silent. Clarissa still didn't flinch. Her expression had frozen into something unreadable. But her attorney was sweating. The judge asked if she had anything to say in her defense. She stood slow and finally spoke. He was going to cut me out. I saw the new will. I knew I was going to be left with nothing. I took care of him when no one else would. I deserved that house. That trust. I deserved to be respected. The judge interrupted her. So you faked a death certificate? You tried to erase a man who was still alive? Clarissa's voice trembled now. I didn't mean to erase him. I just needed the life he promised me. That sentence hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't about money. It was about validation, power, control. The belief that what she wanted should be hers by any means necessary. The court recessed, and the judge promised a ruling within 24 hours. We went home, exhausted and hollow. That night, Dad sat next to me on the porch, both of us sipping from mismatched mugs. You know, he said, there were signs when she was younger. She used to lie about little things, stealing candy, claiming teachers were out to get her. I thought she'd grow out of it. I never imagined she'd grow up to try to steal my name. I nodded, unable to say anything. The emotional toll had long since outpaced the legal one. We were both grieving not for a dead man, but for the daughter he thought he'd raised. The next morning we were called back to court. The courtroom was nearly empty, just the judge, attorneys, Clarissa, and us. Judge Levins read the ruling slowly, every word carved in stone. The court finds that Ms. Clarissa Kingston knowingly and willfully submitted forged documents to this court with the intent to defraud her father and the state. She is hereby disqualified from inheriting under any version of the Kingston will, effective immediately. Further, the court refers this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution under California Penal Code 115 filing false instruments and 368 elder abuse. Clarissa finally reacted. Her knees buckled. A bailiff caught her before she hit the floor. Her attorney whispered furiously, trying to stabilize her, but it was done. She was removed from the courtroom in handcuffs, no longer defiant, no longer clever, just a woman undone by her own greed. The courtroom remained silent as we filed out. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was the kind of ending that feels like someone just placed the final stone on a grave-heavy, irreversible, and painfully necessary. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. I shielded Dad as best I could, and we made our way to the car without comment. But as I opened the door for him, he looked back at the courthouse and said, "We did it, but God help me, I wish we didn't have to." I knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes justice comes wrapped in tragedy. Sometimes to win, you have to lose something first. In our case, we lost a daughter, a sister, a piece of our past, but we kept the truth. And in the end, maybe that's all you can ask for. After the final ruling, life didn't go back to normal. Not really. The court may have given us closure in legal terms, but emotionally, we were navigating a world where everything familiar had been scorched by betrayal. My father was free, no longer erased from the records, his name restored to every title, every account, every deed, but something in him had dimmed. He walked slower, spoke less, laughed never. I caught him staring at family photos more often, particularly the ones with Clarissa when she was young on the dock in her life jacket, hugging a birthday cake at age 6. Her arms around Dad's neck while he lifted her in the air. "Where did she go?" he asked me one night, as we burned documents in the fire pit: fake will, the court copies of the death certificate, the medical logs. What happened to that little girl? I had no answer. That question haunted both of us. Clarissa was now in county lockup, awaiting criminal trial. The DA moved swiftly after the court's referral. Charges included filing false documents, attempted theft by fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit probate fraud. Each carried multiple years. She pled not guilty, of course. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested. "She staged a man's death," the prosecutor said bluntly. "This isn't forgery. This is a crime of personality, a violation of everything a family stands for. We're going all the way." She was denied bail after it was discovered she'd attempted to wire 20,000 from an unknown account to a man in Costa Rica, presumably an escape plan. I remember the look on Dad's face when he heard that. He didn't speak the rest of the day. The media picked up the criminal angle. Headlines included, "Daughter faked father's death for inheritance, but he walked into court alive." News anchors spun it as modern-day Cain and Abel. True crime podcasts began requesting interviews. A documentary team offered us money for access to the entire case file. We declined. "This isn't entertainment," I said. "This is trauma. And we're not selling it." Still, the case went viral online, with amateur investigators combing through property records, LinkedIn profiles, even Clarissa's college essays looking for signs of manipulation. She became a cautionary tale in estate planning blogs. A viral tweet read, "Before you die, make sure you're not too alive. Clarissa Kingston might already be counting your money." We kept to ourselves. I helped Dad close all his accounts, shift everything into a newly structured living trust with an attorney who lived 5 counties away, triple reviewed. He put me as sole trustee and beneficiary. "Not because you're perfect," he said, "but because I know you'd rather die than lie." It was the highest compliment I'd ever received. We added safeguards, biometric access to accounts, third-party verification for asset transfers, a clause that required 2 witnesses for any changes to the will. Dad didn't want to be tricked again. Ever. Still, the emotional scars ran deep. Clarissa's name was removed from everything: bank accounts, property deeds, even the family headstone where space had been saved for her beside Mom. That one hurt Dad most. He visited the cemetery every Sunday, bringing flowers, always taking 2 steps back when he stood at Mom's grave. He never said it, but I knew he imagined what it would be like if Clarissa had just mourned with him instead of turning it into a power grab. "Grief does strange things," he muttered once. But greed makes grief permanent. Meanwhile, I tried to rebuild my own life. Work had been generous with time off, but whispers still followed me in the halls. "That's the guy whose sister tried to erase their dad," I overheard someone say near the break room. It became my new identity, one I hadn't chosen, didn't want, but couldn't escape. I started journaling late at night, trying to write it all down, make sense of the madness. I shared a few entries online under a pseudonym. One post, "How my sister tried to erase my dad and failed," went viral. Suddenly, people began messaging me with their own horror stories. Siblings who forged power of attorney documents, uncles who sold off family farms while the rightful heirs were overseas. It was a revelation. This wasn't rare, it was just rarely caught. With Dad's encouragement, I started a blog, Legacies Protected. Nate helped design it. The goal was simple: teach people how to bulletproof their estates, recognize red flags, and never underestimate the potential for betrayal when inheritance was involved. We hosted sessions, collaborated with probate attorneys, even created templates for inheritance fraud alarms, lists of things to double-check every year. Within months, the blog had tens of thousands of followers. A woman from Vermont messaged me saying our checklist saved her from signing a suspicious document her cousin sent over after her father's stroke. "You saved my dad," she wrote, "from a legal grave." I cried for the first time in weeks. Clarissa's trial began 6 months after her arrest. It was brief, brutal, and conclusive. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysts traced her edits on the death certificate. Bank records showed clear intent to defraud. Testimony from Dad, myself, the probate auditor, and even the title clerk painted a picture of premeditated deception. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts. She was sentenced to 12 years, eligible for parole after 9. No emotion, no apology. Just a long stare at Dad as the judge read the sentence, as if trying to will one final guilt trip into him, but he didn't budge. When it was over, he turned to me and whispered, "She chose this." The following Sunday, Dad didn't go to the cemetery. Instead, he invited me to the lake house for the first time in months. It had been professionally cleaned, redecorated, reborn. We sat on the back deck, overlooking the water. He handed me a folder, his updated will, trust details, letters he'd written to me and Mom. "I wanted you to have this," he said. "Not because I'm going anywhere, but because I want to make sure when I do it's real, and it's right." We toasted with iced tea. The wind was light, the lake shimmered. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, peace visited the Kingston family. And just like that, the story that began with a fake death certificate ended with a living legacy, unbroken, unbought, and fully awake.